So in this video, I want to talk about the US debt crisis. It's actually becoming one of the biggest issues of our time, and it's not just going to affect people in the United States, but the truth is it's actually going to impact the entire world. So back in the 1980, the national debt per household was approximately $39,000. Today, in 2025, it's already shot up to about $273,000 per household, something around that. Now, at the time of this recording, the US debt has already blown up past $36 trillion. And the truth is, it's actually just getting closer to $37 trillion. Now, that's $11 trillion more just since 2020. So, as you can see, there's a lot of problems with the debt. It's actually a debt crisis. And just this year alone, the US will spend over $1 trillion on interest payments. That's actually more than its entire defense budget, which is insane. And it's almost the size of Switzerland's GDP. Now, on top of all of that, we have about $9.2 trillion in US debt that will mature in 2025, and it has to be refinanced. So what that means is they're going to print even more money and increase the money supply even more than it currently is, just so they could pay the previous interest. And the reason they're going to do that is because they don't have the money. The government does not have the money on hand, and it doesn't get enough from GDP. So the debt is going to increase much higher this year and the next year. So if you're wondering, why does this even matter? Because this isn't just some number sitting on a government spreadsheet or just some abstract numbers on a ledger. It's actually a very real problem, and it's setting up a serious challenge for not just us in the coming years, but for future generations in the coming years. So it's not just America that's at risk here. A lot of people think it's just the US, okay, but it's not. This growing US debt could actually turn into a full-blown crisis globally for all global economies around the world. So you see, if America can't pay its debt, the impact won't just stay within our borders in the US. It's actually going to ripple across the entire world. And that's the problem we're facing right now, because the debt is reaching unsustainable levels and only growing. So the big question is, okay, so how will this happen exactly? How could this manifest? So in this video, I'm actually going to give you two sets of very realistic potential outcomes for America based on the data and my own sound judgment. And I'll give you an outcome that's somewhat positive and one that's far more negative. Nonetheless, this is realistic and it's worth listening to, because at least you could prepare ahead of time. So we'll dive into also who America is actually in debt to. And this is important because for every borrower, there's a lender. And I'll talk about why the debt is also growing so fast, and what the key financial institutions that actually oversee the entire monetary system, what they could potentially do to try and avoid a complete financial collapse, and what they potentially might do if they can't avoid a collapse. So at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to the policy response from the central banks and the government, because we are on that path already. The debt is rising at an unsustainable rate, and it's already at unsustainable levels. So we'll start first here. We're already above $36 trillion in debt in the United States. And honestly, we should be actually very proud, because the truth is, it's funny because a lot of so-called renowned economists actually said this is something we would never pull off, and we have. So we're here today, and here we are already heading towards $37 trillion in debt, and it's coming sooner than we think, and that's not going to change anytime soon, in my opinion. So let's break down the US debt problem in simple terms first, so that you could have better context. The US government heavily relies on the nation's economic output and basically economic growth to pay its financial obligations, okay? Because the US needs income to pay its obligations. That means citizens like you and I, businesses, we work, we earn income, and we pay our taxes. And what happens is those taxes actually fund government and the government spending. So things like public services, the military, black budgets, social security, roads, and of course interest payments on their debt, okay? So now this works like this. So think of the government like a person with a credit card, and if that person spends more than they actually make, what they'll do is they'll start putting that difference on the card, okay? So eventually they have to pay it back at some point with interest. So not just the principal, but the interest as well. Well, the US government isn't exactly the same. It's a little bit different, but it's close enough for this example so that you have a better visual of how it actually works, okay? So the government keeps piling on more and more debt, and with every dollar borrowed, what happens is more interest accrues, okay? So they keep borrowing and the interest keeps racking up. But since they don't have enough revenue to cover the interest payments, what happens is they borrow even more money and print more money and borrow it into existence to pay the interest. So as you can see, the interest gets paid, but the debt itself never does. And that's why the national debt keeps racking up and increasing. So what happens is they borrow more to cover the gap. And the more they borrow, the more the debt grows over time. And the more the interest grows along with that. So it just keeps growing, turning into, basically the whole system is going on this never-ending cycle. And it's based on the debt. So in summary, the government consistently spends more than it brings in through taxes. And this is the problem. This is the main source of income, but they don't generate enough income to cover their cost and their expenses. So to keep functioning and to avoid an economic collapse, America just keeps kicking the can down the road and has to keep borrowing even more and more just to make the payments on its credit card. So that's how it works. So again, it's a never-ending cycle, and the debt just keeps racking up. Now, who does the US actually borrow from, and who do they actually owe money to? So I'll explain that very shortly in the video, just momentarily. But before I get to that, I want to bring up a very important point, because here's where it goes from being a problem to a full-blown crisis, this whole debt issue. It's when a country's debt repayments actually become too big for its economy and its GDP to actually really cover. They can't realistically cover it. That's the issue. So that's where we are right now currently. That's what we're dealing with. So the US government's spending has basically gotten out of control. Many economists have been outspoken about this, and tax revenues can't keep up. And that's why central banks go through this debt refinance cycle every 4 years since 2009, because the government and the central banks have to refinance the debt, which interestingly 100% coincide with the 4-year crypto bull run cycles that we experience every couple of years.